They call it the Zangezur Corridor, a stretch of land so narrow it barely registers on most maps. But in the South Caucasus, it's the fault line where empires collide. Azerbaijan calls it a lifeline. Armenia calls it a threat. Turkey sees it as the spine of a new Turkic superhighway. And Iran? A dagger aimed at its northern border. It's just 43 kilometers of proposed road and rail, but behind it lies a decades-old rivalry, shattered ceasefires, and the ambitions of global powers from Moscow to Washington. Now the United States is stepping in with a new plan, a bold business pitch, and echoes of a Trump-era strategy that could reshape the region. Some say it's the key to peace, others call it corridor colonialism. So the question isn't just who builds the corridor, it's who controls the future of the Caucasus. Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. The Zangezur Corridor is a proposed transport route slicing through Armenia's southern Syunik province. Its purpose? To link Azerbaijan proper with its exclave, the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, skirting Armenia entirely to create a direct land bridge to Turkey. It's just 43 kilometers long, but its impact stretches from Beijing to Brussels. The corridor would integrate into Azerbaijan's Horadiz-Akbend highway and rail network, and from Nakhchivan connect to Turkey's Igdir-Kars transport corridor, opening a seamless east-west route through the Turkic world. But to understand the stakes, we must rewind more than a century, when empires crumbled and boundaries blurred. The region now contested as Zangezur was once part of the Russian Empire's Yelizavetpol Governorate. With the empire's collapse in 1917, chaos erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan, two newly born republics locked in a bitter territorial tug-of-war over Syunik.
This Zangezur project is very unique because in many ways it's a small one, just about 40-43 kilometers. Land corridor, which is between Azerbaijan and through southern Armenia and the erstwhile part of the Nagorno-Karabakh, and then it goes along through this middle corridor. And it is an important corridor in one sense that here you have nearly every major power, regional and external, involved. You have Russia, you have USA, you also have Turkey, you have of course Azerbaijan and Armenia, and Iran also is equally involved because of their own geopolitical reasons. And to an extent, because of Azerbaijan, you also have Israelis involved in that sense, because Israel and Azerbaijan do have a very close, comfortable relations. Armenia, on the other hand, after the Russia-Ukraine war began, and unfortunately it became a casualty of the Russian geostrategic games. They have the CSTO base in Armenia, but that had to be dispensed with, and that's why it is becoming increasingly difficult, and there we are having the competition between Russia and the US.
Then came Soviet control. Two rail lines were built, one connecting Nakhchivan through Armenia in 1941 and a second through northern Armenia in the 1980s. But both were abandoned after the first Nagorno-Karabakh war erupted in 1992. Since then, Armenia has remained under a Turkish-Azerbaijani economic blockade, while Nakhchivan was effectively isolated. Over the decades, the idea of a corridor resurfaced repeatedly in land swap proposals, ceasefire drafts, and shuttle diplomacy sessions. In 1992, a double corridor peace idea emerged. Armenia would gain Nagorno-Karabakh in exchange for ceding Syunik's southern edge to Azerbaijan, linking it to Nakhchivan. The plan failed. In 2001, another iteration was floated. Armenia keeps Karabakh. Azerbaijan gets Meghri. Again, no deal. But in 2020, following a crushing Azerbaijani victory in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, the corridor re-entered the picture with teeth. The Russia-brokered 2020 ceasefire called for the unblocking of all economic and transport connections across the region. Armenia would guarantee safe passage between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, with Russian border forces monitoring it.
Про Зангезурский коридор никогда речь не шла в рамках тех договоренностей, которые были достигнуты президентом Путиным, президентом Алиевым и премьером Пашиняном. В заявлении, которое было подписано 9 ноября 2020 года и которое остановило войну, там было сказано, что разблокируются все экономические и транспортные связи, и далее, что Армения гарантирует безопасность транспортного сообщения между западными районами Азербайджана и Нахичеванью в обоих направлениях. А контроль за этим транспортным сообщением осуществляют органы пограничной службы ФСБ Российской Федерации. Это вот практически цитата из того документа, который в трехстороннем формате был подписан 9 ноября 2020 года. Поэтому как-то, да, и то, что сказал господин Пашинян.
That's when Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev first floated the name Zangezur Corridor. A rail link was planned from Horadiz to Zangilan. From there, freight could potentially pass through Armenian territory to Nakhchivan en route to Turkey and then Europe. Aliyev hinted at even grander ambitions, connecting Iran to Russia, turning Zangezur into a key segment of the international north-south transport corridor. The rhetoric turned belligerent. In 2021, President Aliyev declared the people of Azerbaijan would return to what he called West Zangezur, Armenian land in his view. He added, and I quote, "If Armenia does not accept this corridor, we will enforce it by force." Trilateral talks, hosted by Russia, tried to diffuse tensions, but Armenia refused to accept the corridor logic, insisting that any trade route must remain under full Armenian control with no extraterritorial access. Russia walked a fine line. While it brokered negotiations, it also eyed control of corridor security via its FSB border service, embedding itself further into Caucasus transport networks and outflanking Western sanctions. Iran, meanwhile, saw red. The corridor, Tehran fears, would sever its border with Armenia and unleash Pan-Turkic influence along its vulnerable northwest frontier, home to millions of ethnic Azerbaijanis. Ayatollah Khamenei made Tehran's red line clear: no third-party control of Armenian territory and no route that sidelines Iranian trade corridors. Already sidelined in parts of China's Belt and Road, Iran saw Zangezur as a final nail in its Silk Road ambitions. China too entered the calculus. Beijing favors a stable, uninterrupted east-west land corridor, and Zangezur fits the bill. It offers a faster, shorter alternative to the northern route through Russia or the southern one through Iran. It cuts roughly 3,000 kilometers off the journey to Europe. That makes it a natural fit for Beijing's increasingly Western-aligned middle corridor through Central Asia, the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus, and onto Turkey. But Washington's role? Far less productive and far more divisive. Under former President Joe Biden, US diplomacy was viewed in Baku as overtly pro-Armenian. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's mediation efforts, critics say, tilted toward Yerevan, undermining America's position as an impartial broker. When Azerbaijan temporarily shelved corridor demands to advance peace talks, Washington failed to capitalize. Instead, US involvement fueled geopolitical rivalry without resolving the dispute. But now, President Donald Trump, he has a different vision, one that could redraw the map, revive American leverage, and remove both Russia and Iran from the equation altogether. Trump's team has reportedly pitched a plan to hand over Zangezur transit operations to a US-based commercial logistics company. The idea? American business as a stabilizing force, echoing similar deals in Ukraine over rare earth metals and supply chains. The Trump doctrine here is simple: Economic control equals geopolitical leverage. His proposal calls for a legal, peaceful, multilateral corridor not as a gift to Azerbaijan, but as a way to cut Russian FSB control out of the region, undermine Iranian logistics routes, give Armenia security guarantees, and allow US firms to act as middlemen in Eurasian trade. But not so fast. Armenia says, on our terms. Yerevan insists any transit, whether Russian or American-backed, must be handled under Armenian sovereignty. Its crossroads of peace plan demands full Armenian control of infrastructure, customs, and security within Syunik. Analysts warn that even symbolic concessions could open the door to what they call corridor logic, setting a dangerous precedent for foreign-managed zones on Armenian soil. Turkey, of course, is watching with enthusiasm. The corridor is seen in Ankara as a backbone for Pan-Turkic integration, linking the Turkic world from Istanbul to the Caspian and beyond. With Russia distracted in Ukraine, Iran isolated, and the US unsure of its role, Ankara sees opportunity to reshape the Caucasus under a new Turkey-led order. So where does that leave the corridor? In late 2024, Armenia presented new proposals during talks with Azerbaijan in Kazan, part of an effort to soften tensions. Yet, no agreement has been finalized. Aliyev remains steadfast, Iran remains opposed, Russia remains embedded, and Trump remains interested. But the ground situation remains fragile. Periodic military skirmishes along the Syunik border, drone flights, and diplomatic standoffs are all reminders that this corridor, while economic in theory, could become militarized in practice.
There has been some news items that the American company would be basically controlling this corridor, managing to essentially ward off any problems between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which are trying to find a patch-up between themselves and some kind of a coexistence after the Armenians lost out on the whole of Nagorno-Karabakh. Essentially, they had to cede to Azerbaijan, and that is something that has not gone down well with their own local domestic audiences. And for that, they hold Russia directly responsible. Now, so I don't see that this corridor is going to be a very, very peaceful corridor, at least in the near term. And this could have some kind of challenges going forward, because each major power will consider it as their fiefdom, and you might have more flashpoints than simple corridor for passage of trade in transit. But we'll have to see how it goes, because you've seen that Nagorno-Karabakh has taken decades to be resolved. And these are all legacy issues, and the legacy issues do not go away so easily.
Human rights organizations are also raising alarms. Armenian villages near the proposed route have seen increasing surveillance, migration pressure, and fears of displacement. For residents in Syunik, the corridor isn't a strategic abstraction. It's a looming presence that threatens land, livelihood, and identity. And then there's the environmental angle. Conservation groups point out that any new infrastructure project could damage the fragile ecosystems of the Zangezur Mountains, home to endangered species and key water sources. Yet despite it all, economic logic presses forward. Analysts from the World Bank and IMF estimate that if managed under a neutral framework, the Zangezur Corridor could boost regional GDP by as much as 5%, cut freight times by 30%, and integrate Caucasus economies into wider Asian and European markets. In Washington, think tanks from both sides of the aisle see the corridor as a wedge, one that could counterbalance China's Belt and Road, dilute Russian logistics dominance, and give US allies like Georgia a new commercial lifeline. In Moscow, military strategists worry that if American firms anchor in Syunik, it could create a NATO-adjacent logistical zone threatening Russia's southern flank. In Tehran, hardliners warn of an American-Turkish-Azerbaijani axis tightening around Iran's vulnerable northwest, with Zangezur as the spear point. And in Ankara, Zangezur is the next chapter in the Turkic Renaissance, a corridor not just of commerce, but of culture, identity, and influence. As we close, remember, geopolitics isn't just about land, it's about leverage, and few patches of land hold as much leverage per kilometer as Zangezur. From dusty maps to primetime headlines, this corridor has become the litmus test of 21st century statecraft in the Caucasus. The next move could belong to a businessman, a soldier, or a president. Thank you for watching Statecraft.